in this set of presentation, many issues have been raised, so that it's very difficult for me to try to extract some single point. I think that from Marc's presentation, I got a sense of the difficulty of the role of controller, but also the kind of puzzling situation, because it seems to me that you want and you don't want to be responsible. Certainly don't want to be liable. But you want to be in charge, but you also want to delegate to machines. I was thinking, all of us, we know 2001 Space Odyssey, when you had basically two persons in charge, two entities in charge of the aircraft. There was the pilot, and then there was the intelligence in the aircraft itself. And it was an intelligence who had certainly a large level of autonomy, would take decisions discussing things with the pilot, would also have a kind of emotional intelligence, which brought problems in the end, because it was the reason why the crew was killed, and except one, and then the tragedy. So if we think in that broad, faraway perspective, is this the kind of future that you see for yourself? Interacting with pilots and automatic intelligence in this kind of dialectical way, or something different? And then we move into Francis Schubert presentation, where also I found many interesting things that maybe are connected to what you said, but in a different way, because there was the vision of having a separation of tools. And you had different, so integration was done by humans, it seems to be, and automatic tools were providing different inputs. You had knowledge coming in, and then various tools processing the information. I wonder whether this will be the future, because, for instance, in the internet, we are seeing also a different kind of future. There are big companies such as Apple that are integrating all the process and providing a full and integrated package to the user. Is this happening in aviation, or is it the kind of open framework where, as the original vision of the internet, where you have different agents putting forward their different solutions, and then a kind of market-like selection of even of the information? But then we have the problem of liability for how the liability should be allocated for these different components that are not integrated by a single subject. And this also links me into Fabio Ruta's presentation, where again the problem of having automation. It seems to me that the idea of having autonomy into automation is still to be addressed in a way, because it is true we have to focus, as also Marc said, on what are the things that humans are more able at doing. But maybe we should also consider that by integrating human and machines, maybe we can get something that neither humans nor machines can do, and how to have this kind of hybrid agency, but preserving, in a way, encouraging the development of human capacity, I think is a challenge that needs to be addressed. So thank you very much again for your presentation, and I would like now to give to you the floor and to the audience.
Thank you. All presentation was very interesting, in fact, and complementary, I would say. But Francis, yes, we fully support your view of virtual center, and we would expect, I still not say we would have expected from César to be the enabler for all people, all actors, and especially for the providers, to work on this common core system. But is it a reality today?
Well, first of all, Joël, thank you for your support, because this is what we need if we want to progress with the idea. We are aware that this vision doesn't make everyone happy, and there's definitely a need to bring the topic into the discussion, because as you said, for the time, no, it is not happening. We get informal expression of interest for the idea, but there's no force, no thrust to move from the vision to the reality.
I would like to ask for a clarification, maybe to Francis. On this issue of having different entities putting forward different information products and other similar, how do you address the issue of trust in those various components being offered? Is it a kind of market that is going to address the issue so that the better providers are going to get a larger share of the consumers market? Or do you think that there should be some strong constraints on who is offering and also on the regulation of possible failures?
Okay, I'm answering as I think. I hadn't prepared for that specific question, but there are two elements. The first one, there's clearly a safety and integrity, reliability issue that, in our view, should be addressed by the means of very clear rules about the reliability of the service being offered, the data integrity, and so on. And then, for the second step, yes, we do see a market where either individual service providers, existing one, can offer data to other service providers, or that new companies would emerge, the data we're talking about are readily available through different sources, and they would format the data in a way that can be used by the service providers. It's not that far from what you see in the AIM domain. For instance, Jeppesen is typically a data service provider. This is the kind of thinking. Jeppesen is a commercial enterprise, and they provide these kind of data to airlines, and it could be emulated also for the air traffic control business.
Well,
To give to it?
yeah, I think that has also to do with what you were saying. So just from the emotional point of view, I'm in love with my short-term conflict alert, and I'm not jealous at all on the machines which help me to do the things, just to rebound on what you say on the Odyssey. But I'm trusting my systems which are in place and with which I work every day. But that has been a confidence building. I'm using on purpose emotional terms, so feeling terms. It is really, you have to appropriate, you have to get to know each other, you have to learn how to work with each other, so the system which assists you. Now, if whatever comes in as a new application, and as also when listening to the new business model Francis was proposing, all the data we are using, they are somewhere in a slightly different form already available on the market without having to pay for anything. So it is possible, theoretically, if you have a regulator, to approve that you can make air traffic control for the tower in Florence from here with available data on the internet. You just need to have to assemble it to that. So having said all this, for us, in the end, it is a real issue about the trust of the data, and it has to do with repetition. So is it always stable? Is it always trustworthy? And am I not then in the odd case, or maybe not that odd case, being asked to do something I have never been trained for? So these are certainly the challenges, and in our very conservative approach, or mythical conservative approach towards what is then really being brought into the operational world, we always approach it like this. So can you prove me that the system will not fail? If it fails, what do I have to do? Can I trust the system? If I cannot trust it, what are the workarounds? Things like this. And I don't think from a purely operational world that the approach towards something new, be it from free shareware or from internet or from a new form of provider, would have to most probably, how to say that, it doesn't change the approach from a human factors point of view, I think. But what can change, and I think that's what I also tried to explain yesterday, we might have a different approach to redundancy, in the sense that the classical way of approaching redundancy was you have a standby system, which is identical to the number one system. And then you have another system, which is some sort of a really to save your day system, which is some sort of, I talked about the Heathrow emergency tower, where they moved to another building where it's really just to save your day. And then if that fails, you have still some sort of very old-fashioned redundancy system in place. And that was required to pass the regulatory requirements. So safety case, you have to show and things like this. But nowadays, I have an emergency phone, I have a normal phone. If that goes bust, I have as a redundancy an emergency phone. But the next step are mobile phones. So, and we have so much, in the beginning we opposed that because we can't trust, the antennas, and will I then, when I call, really get to the guy in Milan or in Reims or in Marseille who I need to get to. But nowadays it's just pre-programmed mobile phones, and that works. So I think we will see more in this field some sort of modern solution things, where you, for example, turn on Skype to do your coordination instead of having a phone if everything goes down. I'm making that just up like this, but I think that might be changing. But other than that, I think from a purely acceptance point of view, it's all very much trust building, confidence building, and then also that you give the trust to the machine, so you hope it will not cheat on you.
If I can just add one thing, ideally, the issue of the reliability of the data should not be the concern of the individual air traffic controller. It is for the organization, for the service provider, to ensure that the data delivered to the working position is trustworthy. This is the organization responsibility. I don't want the air traffic controllers to have to bother about that.
Yes. Our concern about the reliability of the data is more than on the aircraft side. I mean, are not under our control. Because today the aircraft will use ET's information. So we are aware that the sensor is reliable because we have asked to the supplier to provide one reliable sensor according to the safety requirements. So the information that we'll use, but not for us, the important information are the which one are safety critical. So the information that can influence and can impact the safety. Because if we are discussing about meteorological information or some information that cannot enter in the avionic, for us is not a problem. Because if are not reliable, the possible consequences are limited. This is the main question, because are data that are not under our control. If we have some our meteorological information that are gathered from the aircraft, we are reliable on. So we have trust on this. But what is out of our control, on which also they can be provided with different, let me say, safety practices. Because it is not the same. We have some rules on the aircraft, but we are not sure that our rules are the same of the ground part. It's a typical matter. when I mean the ground part, I mean the third party in general, because probably the future ATM will be more than the current one. Other service provider, other stakeholder. It is our problem today. But for the safety critical item that are for us the most important.
Also, what I did not mention before, but the real challenge for us is that the new generation, which is moving into our ops room, they have a completely different way of believing into what is data and the validity of data. So that might be also a challenge when we move then to the use of that data. I mean, nowadays, if you don't find it on one internet site, you will find it on another, or you will, but you never actually ask yourself from where it comes in the new generation. So nowadays, the literature reference is Wikipedia. But where does Wikipedia come from? And all these things, and I think that will be more challenging, and we have addressed it together with CANSO, so the Air Navigation Service Provider Organization, in a paper which produced for ICAO, or we said the next generation aviation profession. How will we have to integrate these people who just simply see on the screen something and say, yeah, that's okay. And if it's not okay, we find another solution. So that might be more the challenge with the information comes in, safety critical information, say, oh, it doesn't make sense. So what is my other solution to it? Maybe we'll have to work on that, yeah, as a way out.
Yeah. Just some comments on redundancy and trustworthiness of data. When we're talking about this high level of automation that we are talking about here, the human is shifted to higher level management functions naturally. And the menial, let's say, menial tasks and repetitive tasks are the ones that fill up most of the time, or would fill up and would tax the human if he were to try and deal with such a high level of traffic as we envisage in the future. It is those tasks that we are thinking about letting the systems run autonomously as opposed to automation, which is definitely a discussion there. So the human has to be put, the human element has to be put in a point where he has to implicitly trust the data. For that, we need systems to in the context of system health monitoring, check the data automatically. A third system checking the data of other systems and so on and so forth. Because, for example, we should ask the question, in a highly automated system we are talking about, if it fails, is there a strategy for the human to take over? Impossible. It has to be addressed in a way of proactively making sure that the whole system does not crash. For example, the whole internet does not crash. We're talking about internet in various ways. It has one very good thing, which is that it is self-healing. You can, individual connection nodes all over the place can fail. There's always alternative connection nodes. It keeps on working. And the system we are talking about is essentially this. It has to be looked at in this way. If there is a partial failure somewhere, other systems have to have strategies and capacities to take over. We cannot go backwards. The aircraft are upstairs. We definitely cannot put the responsibility in case of a failure on the human element. You will not be able to deal with it. So the strategy will be to make sure the system as a whole cannot fail.
I mean, if I may, it's maybe just an operational reaction that, of course, yes, please, if you can invent such a system which is healing itself, please, because we will not be able, and that is also something we have to be clear, and that's also maybe explaining or give an avenue why our input is so contradictory or can be seen so contradictory. At a certain stage, we have to admit that we have passed the stage where I can come in with my strong points. That's it. If we go towards an automation, so for example now, with the modern screens, with the modern tools, you can have an amount of traffic which you are unable to absorb with old techniques. But when the system you are heavily relying on fails, forget that I can back to techniques I have been using 15 years ago. This is simply not possible. So what we then do instead, for the time being, we are not there with the self-healing products. They are not there. So what we do, we help to save the day with very, very ingenious tools. So for example, in my center, they take a picture of my screen every, I don't know, 10 milliseconds. And that reproduces an emergency screen in the case it's needed. But I will not try to come back and do procedural control. I rely on this picture, and I hope it saves my day. And I know the limitation of this emergency screen. I know the duration. I know the limitations. And I work with that. And what we do, we empty the sky. That means during 15 minutes, we try to get rid of all the traffic there, and then we start new. But if you ask me then to go back and take papers, forget it. It's not possible anymore. So I think the self-healing part would be very nice.
Yeah. Okay. Hello. My name is Marita Lindner. I'm an independent expert from Germany. I have one question to Francis. First, with the one remark to the things with the data. I think data integrity and availability, that's very well solved by the engineers already. And I agree with Fabio that the security issue will be one of the main aspects in the future. But one question to your charming concept of the data cloud: how do you see your concept according to the SWIM concept in these? Is it an add-on or a competitive concept?
Definitely do not duplicate anything that must not be duplicated, and if we can use SWIM to implement that, do it that way.
This is a little comment on Fabio Ruta presentation, and in one of your first slides, there was the statement that the system is not liable. If we are saying that the system is we are not going to put a system in a jail, of course we all agree. But what I think is that in the future, if we assume that a system is autonomous, we should take in account that we can consider a system at least responsible. And I mean, if we have a task, and the task is executed by a human being now, and we are assessing his responsibility, namely, for example, the fact that we will ask ourselves what's going on in his mind. So we will analyze the way he's taking his decision, and we will try to understand whether or not in executing his task, he adopted the necessary duty of care. Now let's imagine that we substitute that person, that human being, with an autonomous system. Why we shouldn't ask ourselves as lawyers exactly the same questions? Namely, again, what's going on in the mind of the system? Whether or not in executing the task, the system adopted the same level of care. Of course, after that, and this for me means assessing the responsibility, we will have different results. In the first case, liability of the person. In the other case, liability of the manufacturers of the system or the people that, I don't know, introduce the rules or other information in the system itself. So this is my...
Thank you. But system responsible is one thing. System liable is another. I remember some years ago when we prepared our first demonstrator of RPA, remote pilot aircraft, and we have discussed with our national authority, ENAC, to perform, when we performed the first flight. The question was, but in case we will lose the link, the data link, who is liable for? The pilot? I cannot do anything because it's not under my control. Was a big question. Because in that case, we will, let me say, accept the automation or the autonomy, but somebody at the end need to take the responsibility. Because if the aircraft will crash on some part of where there are people, somebody needs to be liable. I know it's difficult to understand it, and also for my side. But if I take, again, the cap of the citizen, I accept it. We need. Exactly. This was my statement.
Okay, last question.
In the recent past, we've had some problems with the strange behavior of some aircraft flying, in my opinion, outside the legal point of view of the normal ATM procedure. The Airbus 320, when started to fly in the airspace, used to fly behaving the flyby procedure over some points instead of fly over or whatever. In my opinion, there was no commitment by the ruling activities of ruling industries. Nowadays, I think that ATM rules are chasing industries. I mean that industry is proposing every time new concepts, trying to force the system by developing new business-based concepts and trying to make the aircraft flying at a cheaper or with a lower cost index, and that the ATM world has to follow this implementation and saying, okay, now we have something new, we have to put new rules to face this new concept. What is the commitment of Cesar or providers of starting to rule new implementations before anything or new concept is already developed?
Is your question whether the rule should come before the concept? Is that
Yes.
your question? I have
because if you remember when the Airbus 320 started to fly, deviating from its intended routing, also by 7 to 8 miles away from the turning point, and every time we asked the pilot, why are you behaving in this manner? Their response was because the aircraft is flying this way. So the system has a liability, or anyway had a liability in this. Or if it is not for the system, the liability was on the operator that operates this aircraft. And what comes out from this behavior is that the national provider has to tell, watch out, do the correct monitoring, because sometimes aircraft flies in a non-correct manner.
I can try because I know exactly what you're talking about. It's an interesting one. So you have an aircraft which is designed to follow the applicable rules. Then you find out that some software, not necessarily for just the aircraft, but for the companies, is introducing a cost factor indicator, so a flying fuel factor indicator, which then makes that you expect that the aircraft goes over this point and turns over this point, but actually the turn starts already 30 miles before the point. Okay? That, as such, can be addressed to the software provider, and that is something we have discovered when you then ask, but is there a procedure in place which defines flyby? That means that you can start your turn, and your turn starts, let's say, 15 miles or 7 miles before, and the flyover. Then you realize that, yes, there is something where we have to strengthen the rule because there's a new product available. So, and through the process of EASA, we, at least from IFATCA point of view, have put a lot of hopes that we will be able to filter these things out before they are hitting the operational world. But we should not fool ourselves. Nowadays, an airline is only money-minded, is fuel and cost efficiency. That means it is not anymore anything else than the cost indicator which drives your aircraft. Introducing new things, which even with the best regulatory approach, with the best rulemaking approach, you cannot capture. That's the safety issue. Because there is an element where the pilot on his pre-descent checklist has to push the button to inhibit the cost indicator. Otherwise, the aircraft reduces to 230, 220 knots. And behind we have the guys, we had huge, nice air misses, where same type of aircraft, different companies, and suddenly you lose the separation because one has forgotten to switch off the button, or the company said, no, don't switch it off anymore. We need to save another 8 kilo fuel per flight. So that are the things which, even with the best rulemaking, we will never be able to find out prior to the introduction in the operational world. But I think we need to go to coffee now.
Thank you very much for this.